Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm very, very excited to introduce today Polly Benson. My friends, Polly Benson is phenomenal. She is an occupational therapist of over 30 years. She's hailing from Gainesville, Georgia, and it's such a pleasure to have her on the program today. So, Polly, thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's get started a little bit because you actually specialize in handwriting. But
Yep.
let's talk about how you got into becoming an occupational therapist. Like, what led you to that? Let's start there.
Yeah, so I just always enjoyed when I was younger doing creative problem solving. I enjoyed working with my hands. I enjoyed things like crafting and just different strategies like that, working with different mediums, whether it
Mhm.
was cross stitch or sewing or art or paper crafts or scrapbooking. And so when I went to college and I kind of stumbled into OT because my sister was a physical therapist. And I was like, well, what's occupational therapy? And a lot of occupational therapy background is in using those types of mediums with
Wow.
mental health and with physical rehab and helping people to become stronger. And my mom was a nurse, and I knew I wanted to be in the medical field. So that's kind of where all that came from.
So awesome. So then where did you start? So you graduate, you've decided to become an occupational therapist, you finish all of your credentials to become such. Where did you go next?
So I spent some time in acute care. I spent some time in work hardening. I spent some time just kind of traveling around and figuring out what I enjoyed the most, home
Mhm.
health, school based. And I really kind of I did rehab for quite some time, but I've really enjoyed working with children. And
Mhm.
a lot of rehab is older adults and people that have had injuries. And so
Yeah.
I ended up on a brain injury floor and working with students that had brain injuries, and really found like it fascinating to be helping that student to get back their occupation of being a student. And using that background, eventually stumbled into a job where I could work in the school system. So my very first job in the school system was with severe to profound students that had either had birth injuries or brain injuries or
Uh,
some type of diagnosis that um, really could not be in a regular school setting. So I was in a
mhm.
special school for special needs children, and that's where I started to get my school experience. And then when I moved to Georgia about, well, gosh, 13 years ago, I wanted to work in the schools because I had children in the schools, and I reached out to the school that my son attended and said, hey, who provides your therapy? And I want to get some experience and do this next. So that's kind of how that all started.
Very nice. Now, for those who are not familiar with what an occupational therapy does, a therapist does, or like what the point is, because I remember when I was very first introduced to occupational therapy because of my daughter who has sensory processing disorder, I didn't really know anything. Like I didn't,
hmm
I felt like I was totally in the dark. So, what is the main objective for an occupational therapist?
So, yeah, that's a great question. Typically, you're looking at the occupation of a person. So, in an
Mhm.
older adult, their occupation of uh, just being a housewife or having a husband that is a worker and they have an injury, maybe they have a stroke or something where they can't do their occupation of being a person. And so occupational therapy comes in and helps retrain them. We might provide them with adaptive equipment, accommodations, things like that to substitute for where their deficits are. In the school setting, sometimes the kids are born with deficits or they're falling behind in school. And so the occupational therapist helps them with the occupation of being a student. And so, like you said, sensory processing or handwriting or fine motor skills, visually impaired, hearing impaired, those deficits interfere with their day to day functioning at a school. And so they can get some school services provided um, on an IEP. And so that stands for Individual Education Plan. And a lot of times the IEP provided by the school system includes occupational therapy.
And like, what was your experience like working in the school? About how many kids would you take a day or a week? What did that look like?
Yeah, it really depended on the type of school you were at. You know, I was pretty fortunate. I had a caseload of maybe 10 treatments a day. I did a lot
Mhm.
more one-on-one. We weren't allowed to do a lot of groups. I know in speech therapy, they did more group settings. But, you know, I traveled between schools. So I had caseloads of 60 to 90 kids trying to
Wow.
remember, you know, all their names. And the ones that I saw regularly certainly knew them well. But also, I found that there was a disconnect between that student and me with the parent. And so I really enjoyed working with the children, but
Yeah.
in order to get that child to succeed, you have to work with the teacher and the parent. And there's just a lot of extra time and effort and things that go into trying to work in that for that student and accommodate for that student and help that student to get stronger. But when you have parents that work during the day or
Yeah.
a poor home situation, then that there's a big disconnect there.
Yeah. And it sounds like it limits the student's ability to do what they need to do ultimately.
Yeah, we're working, we're helping them to progress, but as the school year progresses, so do the demands, and so sometimes those
Yeah.
kids always can't keep up.
Wow. So, how long did you work in the school system before you moved working to in the private sector?
So basically, I have about 20 years of experience in the school system between the severe to profound and my current situation. Most recently, uh, not really retired, but um, chose not to work anymore. I worked a few years through COVID and then resigned so that I could do my business full time. So right now, all my interaction with kids and parents is more of a OT coaching and being able to coach the parent how to provide some of those OT services at home and help to connect those parents with what is the issue, what is the deficit. A lot of
Mhm.
parents can't afford to go get an occupational therapist evaluation and treatment, and when they do, if they do find the funds to do that, they might get 6 or 12 treatments. And so I really found a passion in my heart to help moms that these kids are falling through the cracks. So
Yeah.
year after year, their handwriting's not getting better, or maybe some other behaviors are interfering with their learning. And so that's really where I've spent the last couple of years now, is in the private sector, as you mentioned, is doing more coaching for the parents and helping kids through their handwriting challenges
Yeah.
with my product. So
I love it. Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit because um this is something that I thought was super cool when I very first met Polly. She had developed a way to help kids with their handwriting and more importantly help moms to help kids with the handwriting, which is
yeah.
why I wanted to bring Polly on. Um so let's talk about like what you developed and what that looks like at home.
Yeah, so the product that I invented and created is called the Liner, and it is a rolling ink stamp that creates handwriting lines so that students can practice their handwriting throughout the day. So, as an OT, I was pushing into a classroom, and because I
Mhm.
had so many students, I couldn't always be in the writing class. I couldn't always be
Yeah.
in ELA. So, sometimes I had to go to science or social studies, and they don't have handwriting lines in those classes. And so, I wanted to make it more functional for the student. And instead of saying, oh, here, practice writing these sentences, if we're in science class, let's write about science and let's help you fill out that science form. But there were no lines. And so I was drawing the lines by hand with a ruler, and I couldn't get that dashed line straight. And it was frustrating for the child. I tried extra papers. You know, here's a handwriting paper. Well, then those papers weren't together. And so I
So
just knew there had to be a better way. And it dawned on me through my crafting background that I wanted a rolling ink stamp. So I started searching for a rolling ink stamp for handwriting, and they didn't exist. And so
Wow.
I said, by golly, I'm just going to go apply for a patent and see if I can manufacture this. And that's what I did. And I just took it one day at a time. And I came up with a rolling ink stamp that drew handwriting lines. And so threw it out in a Facebook group of OTs that are my colleagues, and they went crazy over it. And so I decided to move into that and just go ahead and trust my gut that it would be a successful product. And now we have 15, 16 different products that we sell for music. We have music staff, for handwriting, and for math. So we have different shapes and boxes and things that we use our stamps for math. So my kind of lane, so to speak, is a rolling ink stamp that you can use in art class, on a paper plate craft, wherever the student needs to practice handwriting. And
Nice.
the more research, recent research has really showed that the best way to improve handwriting isn't so much through exercise as it is through the actual practice of handwriting.
Yeah. The actual doing of it. Like
Yes,
we can
right.
talk about it. It's doing the thing, not just talking about the thing.
Right. And
Right.
kids, they get bored with that. They don't want to write a sentence after sentence. They don't want to practice again. They don't understand the repetition. So the way to make it more functional is to make it fun. And one of the ways we make it fun is let them draw their own lines. And maybe it's crooked. Maybe they go across the paper in a curve, and that's okay. You can still write on a curved line, and that requires extra concentration, which is going to actually help them more with their handwriting. So we try to make handwriting fun. We have a lot of different tips and tricks and techniques on our social media and in our Facebook groups, on our website. And so I'm always just trying to come at it from a perspective of, let's make it fun, let's make it repetitious, and let's make it easy for mom.
It sounds awesome. Now, what do you find is the biggest challenge for most kids when it comes to their to their handwriting of the kids that you worked with?
So
What's
that's
the
an
hardest
interesting
thing that they
question,
deal with?
because it really does vary based on the student. Like, some children have trouble with the size of their letters. And so when you have, say, a letter H that isn't very tall, it could look like an
Mhm.
N. So we're looking at legibility. With another student, it might be overlapping letters and not spacing well. So if they write the word, trying to think of an easy word, like not, N-O-T. So it could look like an N-O, and then the T could be the next word. So no and not are two very different words. And
Right.
so, for another student, it might be spacing. So it's not necessarily what is the specific issue we see most. It's really what is specific to that child that is a really good opportunity to just correct one thing to help their legibility. So
Gotcha.
a lot of students that fall through the cracks, it's because of a legibility issue.
Mhm.
We're not necessarily worried about how you hold your pencil, because by fourth grade, they have a wacky pencil grip. They're going to always have a wacky pencil grip. But I've seen adults
That's my
with,
son right now.
yeah, I mean, you can be completely functional writer with a wacky pencil grip. So I'm not going to, hone in on how are you holding your pencil as much as what's your legibility output? What's that look like? And let's
Yeah.
see if we can help you to improve that.
So how long, okay, because for a lot of parents, I've talked to different moms who are like, I work for so long with my child, and but how long really does a child need to practice at a time? Like length of time wise, what does
Yeah,
that
I
look
mean,
like?
again, I think that's individual. I think some kids can pick it up faster than others. Some kids need more repetition. Depends on how weak they are. So if there's a bit of a strength issue when they have the pencil writing, and the more writing they do might make them stronger. But other kids, the more writing they do, it might make them cramp. And so we have to kind of, as an OT, what we look at is, what is the root issue? What is causing a problem? And let's go ahead and address some of those things to see if we can get them to write for longer periods of time or write neater. Do we need a
Mhm.
sentence? Do we need a paragraph? Do we need an essay? So that really does vary as well.
What do you do like when a child or a teen is really frustrated? Um, as an OT, like let's say my son comes in and he's 11 And after a few minutes, he gets really frustrated with the practice, with it all. It's bugging him. What would you do?
Well, I think it's important with that age of a child to really, instead of telling them what to do, ask them how they're feeling, ask them why they're feeling that way. Try to incorporate them in the goal and the lesson. What is
Mhm.
the goal? If your goal is to write neater, is it to write faster? Is your goal to, some kids feel like, um, other kids judge them that they're stupid because they have poor handwriting, or that they're not as smart because their handwriting isn't legible. So, maybe it's a self-esteem issue. And if we can help that student to figure out what is the goal for the student, then we're going to get better buy-in from the student. If the student has trouble practicing and is just like, maybe it's not their day or their moment, maybe we can set a timer. Okay, let's come to an agreement. How much are you willing to do for me right now? Okay, let's decide 15 minutes. I'll give you 15 minutes of my time, and then you can go off and do your thing, do your video game, go outside and play, whatever it may be. So then for that 15 minutes, we're going to set a timer, and we're going to really
Mhm.
focus on, what is that legibility issue. So for another student, I may have determined that, where they start their pencil point placement might be the issue that we're working on. And so let's just work on that. And do we want to incorporate something fun? It's not just writing sentences, right? Maybe we're incorporating a game where they have to do 10 in a row and I time them. And then how many did you actually get on the line? Maybe it's the dots and boxes game. So if you've ever seen those, it's like a bunch of little spots on a paper and you draw a line and then you try to connect the lines and make boxes. But if you've ever played that game, try to do it with more pencil point accuracy, where you're going from the center of one dot to the center of another dot and you're not
Hmm.
overextending. And so that type of can be more fun for that student, but we're still working on their goal of pencil control and slowing down and not rushing through. Or maybe another student, they take too much time. And so we want to encourage them to go faster. So again, it really just depends on the student. But if the student is frustrated, then let's get them to buy into what is the end result that you want to achieve as well as what I want to achieve. And let's put that together and come up with something together that we're both happy with.
Did you ever have any students that were like, I'm done. I'm not doing anything.
Sure.
I'm finished. Like,
Yeah,
I'm finished.
right.
Or my handwriting looks awesome. I think it's beautiful. I can read it. Did you ever have any of those kids?
I suppose you do. And if there's a child that just doesn't want to write, and you have to look at their writing. If their writing is legible and they're done, then maybe it's time for discharging services. If we're looking at their writing and you can't even read it, then maybe there's a different approach that needs to be done. Maybe we work on a dry erase board. Maybe we work on, technology where you're tracing handwriting apps, or you're doing the same types of activities that I wanted to do in fine motor. Now we're doing them with some sort of piece of technology like an iPad app or something. And that can help motivate them. And there's a give and a take, and there's reward systems we can incorporate. And, a lot of times when the student starts getting to the result they want, which many times might be self-esteem, then they're going to enjoy doing
Yeah.
it. And they start showing it off and saying, hey, mom, look, I want to go show this to Miss Polly. I can't wait. I'm so excited. The teacher gave me this great grade. And, so it's fun to see that too.
That's cool. Okay. So, as you know, like we work predominantly, well, we're homeschool moms.
Right.
Um, as a homeschool mom, like what as an occupational therapist, what would you suggest that homeschool moms can do? I guess in public school moms too that are helping with their kids, but what can we do as parents to help our kids with their handwriting? Um, especially like for those who don't have access to services or they don't qualify for services, but the child still needs help.
Yeah.
What would you suggest?
So, there's certain developmental levels. Kids are being pushed into situations earlier and earlier in life. I didn't learn typing until seventh grade. These kids are
Yeah.
learning typing in kindergarten. Their fingers are not ready for it. And so
Mhm.
some of those bad habits are getting started early. We want to strengthen the hands and the intrinsic muscles, but we don't want to do it too soon. So we have to really look at how much time are they spending on the computer, and let's work on mousing skills, because that's something that's much more functional than actually typing skills.
Yeah.
So, as far as other things you can do at home, some kids pick up handwriting really well and work through the workbook, and other kids don't. So I'm more of a remediation specialist, somebody that's having trouble with a student that has tried all the curriculums, or has tried copying and has tried tracing and has tried these techniques,
Mhm.
and they're not working. So um, that's where my background comes in. I think some of the fun things you can do, I think, is go to the dollar store and get different items that you can incorporate more fun and functional strengthening activities for your fine motor skills. So I do have a free resource I'd be happy to share with your
Thank you.
listeners.
That
I
would
think
be
there's over
awesome.
60 different things you can get at the dollar store to work on occupational therapy goals. So I think that's a fun little thing we can throw in there too.
That would be fantastic. So, what are some of the things that they could get, just as an example?
Yeah, so I love to just say, let's put together a fine motor kit. We're gonna grab a shoebox with a lid, and we're gonna put
Okay.
some things in there. So I have like top 10 OT tools at the dollar store. Something would be like a pair of tongs. Tongs or tweezers, I love, because we're working on a tool use, we're working on the hand, opening, closings, great for scissor skills. So I like to say, find some type of a tong or a tweezer or something like that. Now, with using that, you have to have something to pinch and pick up. So they have little puff balls, they have the mini
Mhm.
erasers. You can find things in the crafts section, and then something like a jar at home where you dump out the jar and then you pick them up one hand at a time. Or maybe you do right hand, left hand, or maybe you do play a game, get all the blue ones first, then we get the yellow ones. So, picking up and practicing using those tongs is a really fun activity to do for the students.
I
So
love
that's
that. I love
that's
that.
kind of like my number one. As far as some of the other ideas, there are school supplies at the dollar store, but in a fine motor cut, I like putty or Play-Doh. With the putty or Play-Doh, you're working on the strengthening. You're working on the what we call the palmar grasp. So you're going to have there's a natural curve to your hand when you're holding a pencil, and so putting strengthening and activities to encourage that palmar grasp and to encourage that cupping of the palm. Some of the things that work on that would be using like your putty, and you're going to roll it out into hot dog shape, or you're going to
Mhm.
pinch it, or you're going to make little balls, little and smash them together. You can flatten it out into a pancake. You can press it between your hands. You can hide things in it. So another one of my favorite items to get at the dollar store are the beads. Then you hide the beads in the putty, and you have to find those. So, your child can be sitting in front of television, and you're like, here, find the beads. And you hand them the putty, and they, have to press it and mold it and push it and find the beads inside and put them back in the container. And then when they're done, you just throw the putty back on top. So, beads are a really great thing to get at the dollar store. You can have a shoelace in your fine motor kit, and you can practice stringing beads. For kids that can't quite understand and have the development to do the bead with the shoelace, they can
Mhm.
use pipe cleaner. So pipe cleaner is another good thing to get at the dollar store. And they can put beads on the pipe cleaner. We have a fun activity we do where you take a colander and put it upside down, and then you put
Uh-huh.
spaghetti in the colander holes, and then you put the beads on the colander holes. So, that's up and down and working on that fine motor pinch. So that's always a real good fun activity for the kids as well.
I love that. Well, because I hear from a lot of like moms of very young children who are like, my child is 4 or 5 and they're not writing very well and they're frustrated. And I've always felt like, well, but their hands are not that developed yet.
Right.
They're still struggling with the fine motor skills. What would you say to some of those moms that have these little kindergartners or maybe even first graders and they're these tiny kids? Should they be worried if their child is struggling with writing that young?
So you first started off with like 4-year-olds, but then you said up to first grade. So there is
Yeah,
definitely
so
a difference there. So
yeah,
in
so
the
talk about
younger
that. Talk about that.
children, pre-K, it's all about play. It's incorporate it into your everyday. Put them in the bath, have them squeezing sponges and filling up cups and dumping and pouring into cups, and have them, writing on the wall in shaving cream. So, if you can incorporate those fun activities, just talk about a letter, or maybe mommy makes the letter and the baby identifies the letter. So when they're young, it's all about play. As they do get into
Hmm.
kindergarten, that's where they should be developing those writing skills. And by first grade, if they don't have writing abilities to form letters, that's definitely a concern. So if they can write words and sentences, they should be writing very basic sentences in kindergarten, but by first grade, we should have full, 5, 6 word sentences. And yeah, so, basically what I would say to those moms is the younger they are, incorporate play. The older they get, let's get into more like fine motor play, games, rolling the dice, putting a pair of dice in the hand and making it click. That's a good
Hmm.
test for your student. So if your student cannot cup the hand enough to roll the dice and make them click without losing the dice, then if you practice that more, they're going to get their grasp better on their pencil and they're going to get better handwriting. So it's little things like that.
So when would a parent be concerned to be like, okay, they're this old and they're not able to write a word, or they're struggling, like this is a struggle. At what point should a parent be very concerned about that?
I think parents have a really good gut feeling.
Mhm.
You don't want to compare to peers, but sometimes you have to. And sometimes you
Okay.
can see that the peers are doing, you know, beautiful writing. That student may have been, that anomaly child. You want to
Yeah.
compare to all the children. You want to see, okay, you go to a parent teacher conference, or you go to an art show, even if it's homeschool and you have a co-op and you have an art show, and how they write their name, and kind of look at that. If,
Yeah.
if the student doesn't like it, if you see that they're avoiding writing tasks, it's really important to, I always make sure the parents have had a vision evaluation, because if the student doesn't see well, then
Yeah.
they're not going to write well. So we want to make sure that we are ruling out medical issues first. Can they
Hmm.
see properly? And do they need glasses? Because that may be all it is. And that may be something you can do before you go to OT services. So, yeah, you want to, you can do some comparison. You can look up writing samples, images of writing samples for different grade levels, and
Yeah.
developmentally. You can see where your student should be developmentally, what they should be able to do. There's minimums. And then, if your student's not hitting the minimums and those milestones, then that's definitely a place to be concerned.
Now, let's say a parent, should a parent be concerned like that their child is never going to get caught up if developmentally they're a little bit slower than, say, their peers? Because I do hear that from moms like, oh my gosh, they're never going to be able to get caught up. Or is that a fallacy?
That's a good question. I mean, I think sometimes, are we still good?
I can hear you now. You cut out for just a second. Could you repeat that?
Okay. Um, So I think it depends. We have students that, your mom is sitting there and she's worried they're never going to catch up. And, we're talking about potty training. And yet most everybody, becomes potty trained at some point, right?
Right,
Fine
right.
motor skills are a little bit different. So a student can have that deficit for a very, very long time.
Mhm.
I have, my kids have been through high school, and I've seen high schoolers with those deficits. They're not getting, therapies, but you want to look at, are they functional? And, if they're not buttoning their shirt, middle school, yeah, that may be a problem. We can provide adaptations or accommodations. So sometimes it's really a decision that needs to be made between the student, the parent, and, the pediatrician, as to, do we need to accommodate, or do we need to really focus on this? So as far as, you know is it ever too late? No. The brain is neuroplastic. It can always change. It can always
Yeah.
develop new neural pathways. We can always make improvements. So, I tend to look at more the function. And, when does a parent get concerned they're never going to catch up? They may not catch up, and you don't want to give up too soon on your student. I've
Yeah.
had students in high school that had special needs, and they hadn't worked on shoe tying since, third grade. And so here we are in 12th grade, special needs student, and I taught them to tie their shoe. And the parent was thrilled. They were like, "Wow, I kind of gave up on that a long time ago. I never thought about that anymore." Another student couldn't write her name, but we ended up giving her a kind of a guideline as to how to write her name. And we had little boxes for her, and she could write her name in that box. And so eventually, mom turned that into a stamp so the student could sign her name, because as students get into their older ages, we have to look at those job application skills and
Mm-hmm.
ability to fill out a form and to be an adult. And so you got to sign your name. So maybe you gave up on handwriting way back when in fifth grade, and your student's been typing ever since, but there's still a need for being able to write your name and fill out a form. And those things happen in everyday life.
Fantastic. So, if any last words for parents who are who want to help their kids better, and they want to be good moms and help their kids with the fine motor skills and all of those things, what would you say?
Yeah, so a couple things I can say. Certainly, if any of your listeners want to just have a quick little exploration call with me or send me some handwriting samples, I'm happy to look at that. But I think one thing that's really good to do is to start with what is within my power, what can I do? And one of those things is my product. So wanted to kind of share a little bit about my product and the Legiliners and what they do. And so having your student use a Legiliner to be able to draw their own handwriting line and practice, we not only have handwriting lines for younger kids, we have the wide rule lines for older kids. We have a thing called a bullet journal stamp now that some of the high schoolers are using, and they can draw out this like grid of a very faint background just to write a little straighter. And so, you know, as a mom, what is within your power? What's within your power is to advocate for your child and
Mm-hmm.
don't give up. Like if your student is struggling, then, seek out information on the web, seek out help, seek out products that might help them. Find an OT that might be able to just give you a few minutes of time, answer some questions. There's groups out there as Facebook groups. You can post questions in OT groups and get some advice that way too.
I love that. I love that. Well, and I'm going to go ahead and put in the show notes. Polly's been so gracious to offer a free download of 60 things you can get at the dollar store to help their fine motor skills, correct?
Yes, so
Or just
50,
help as a toolbox.
yes, 60 things that you can utilize at the dollar store for occupational therapy.
That is fantastic. And I'll also include a link to her website. If you have any questions for her, you can reach out to her via her website and look at some of the things that she's offered families to help their students get better with their handwriting as an occupational therapist. Polly, thank you so much for taking your time with us today to talk about what moms can do and how to help these wonderful moms as they homeschool their kids. So thank you so much.
You are so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And in the meantime, moms, I know you get discouraged some days, but remember tomorrow's a new day and you've got this. You're doing great. So with that, take care, mamas. We'll talk to you next week.